3.5-inch floppy disks is the one we're having particular problems with. So original Amiga ST PC disks, we've had them where we've gone to put them in the machine, the heads come up and just the plastic of the disk has disintegrated.
Say hello to Adrian Page Mitchell from the Centre of Computing History in Cambridge. As you can imagine, a museum about computers has a lot of equipment and material to look after, like floppy disks for instance. But as we will hear in this episode, all storage media decay. And together with Adrian and my two other guests, Callum McKean and Leontien Talboom, we'll talk about why we want to keep old floppy disks and hard disks and why data on them rot. Compared with prints and handwritten manuscripts, not to mention rolls of papyrus and clay tablets, digital data storage is a complete novice. We have handwriting and prints from hundreds of years ago, but modern computers didn't arrive before the 1950s, and it was really with the arrival of personal computers in the 1980s and the 1990s that we started to see an increase, or shall I say explosion, of digital data and the media they're stored on. And since this form of data creation and storage is rather recent, you'd have thought that it would be easy to access and recover them, but that's not really the case. A few weeks ago I ran an episode on the problems you face when saving and preserving data. Well, one of the problems we haven't really talked about much in that episode is that the physical media they're stored on decay over time. And that seems to happen quicker than we think. Of course, paper decays too, which is why some old books need to be stored in protected and tightly controlled environments. But in general, I can still pick up a book I bought several decades ago and read it, never mind that the pages might have turned a little bit yellow. But you may find it difficult if you try to get data from a hard drive or floppy disk that's 20 years old. A challenge that researchers and librarians face today, because even in this comparatively short period of time, a few decades at most, we created digital text, audio, video and other stuff like games with a vengeance. A massive digital time capsule, a snapshot of our lives and work. Whether that's private data, official records, or data from scientific experiments. Keeping data is important, and not just for future historians who try to make sense of the world we all live in today, but also because data could be reused in future applications. In particular, of course, in science and technology, it's essential to keep experimental and analysis data. Keeping these data safe has been, for centuries, well, millennia really, the job for libraries. And this, of course, is still the case today. Callum McKean is one of the researchers at the British Library who is trying to make sure that digital artifacts from people in the UK get preserved. I met Callum in autumn 2025 at a conference organised by the National Archive in the UK, where Nana Bonde-Tulstrup gave a keynote presentation. And you heard from Nana a few weeks ago during the episode on data preservation. How does Callum and his colleagues get hold of the data in the first place? And how easy is it to actually read and store them? So let's turn over to Callum now.
My name is Callum McKean, so I'm the lead curator for personal digital archives at the British Library. So what that means is I work within the Contemporary Archives and Manuscripts Department, which has a kind of temporal remit from around 1950 up until the present day. But I look after digital materials, so obviously that's not going back to the 1950s for the most part. Mostly it's from around the mid-1980s up until the present day. And these are personal digital archives, so they are digital archives created by individuals, usually over the course of their career, so their creative work, or whether they're politicians or scientists, and they deposit their archives with the library, usually in the form of carriers that kind of chart the history of personal computing from around the mid-1980s up until the present day. So that's everything from floppy disks or more exotic formats like Amstrad disks, all the way up to USB pen drives and full laptop computers.
Well, that's quite a wide range. So first of all, how do you get to the people? And why is it that we want to archive the digital output from individuals?
We have an acquisitions policy, so we have a list of people that we are kind of interested in targeting because their work has been deemed to represent a significant contribution to UK cultural, scientific, or political life. So that's how we get to the people. We make contact through a variety of ways. Often we have pre-existing relationships, either through exhibitions or events that the library runs. We may have contact with them beforehand, or it may come through specific manuscript dealers or auction houses, usually. In terms of why we want it, it's the same reason why we would want the personal archive, the paper archive of any important individual, really, because in microcosm, their life and work represents larger trends in what UK cultural life has come to mean for everyone. And so by getting a sense of what their creative process was, how they made the important works that have come to impact all of our lives, we get a deeper understanding of really what it means to be a human being creating art in our particular historical moment. It's interesting for us now, but I think it's also interesting. We have to take a very long view in cultural heritage institutions like the library. It's going to be particularly interesting for people in 100, 200, 300 years' time.
So that's what we're talking about. We're trying to store the data for a very far away future.
Yeah, in perpetuity. So there is no end in sight. We want to exist and preserve this stuff forever. That's our goal.
What you said is quite right. I mean, we used to look at manuscripts in terms of paper, and, library is what usually people associate with books and papers and magazines and prints, etc., which is all very well because it's kind of one type of medium. So you have a piece of paper or a papyrus in ancient days. But the problem with digital content, as you alluded to already, is that it can be stored on many different devices and takes many different forms. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's a real issue with legibility in terms of digital content when you compare it to paper content. So you used the example of a papyrus. We have papyrus in the library's collections, and they are still readable provided that you have the language skills and provided that they've been conserved properly. With digital material, even going back to sort of the early 90s or the late 80s, those mediums and the data structures on them are not natively readable on modern machines. And so we need to excavate that work, even though it's really, really recent. That's quite an issue considering how far back we're going, really. It's not very far in the past at all. It's even within our lifetimes.
How do you go about then taking this different material and extract it? As you said already, you have floppy disk, you have Amstrad disk, which I vaguely remember from the 1980s. You have floppy disk in different formats as well, because we know the 3-inch, but we also have the 5-inch disk. We have magnetic tapes, we have SSD drives. So that's a huge thing. And I guess this is probably where the forensic element comes in, doesn't it?
The way in which we capture information from these disks, we really have to borrow from lots of different fields and adjacent forms of practice. So we rely on digital forensics techniques that were developed mostly in a law enforcement context.
Yeah.
The carriers that the material comes in on are inherently vulnerable. Like, these bits of plastic and metal weren't designed to exist forever. They weren't designed to carry data forever. So the first task that we really have when we bring them in is, how do we get the data off them and store it in a way that is secure and, like I alluded to earlier, available in perpetuity. So the reason we use digital forensics techniques to do this is because the way in which data is stored on these carriers really varies depending on the carriers, and there's some quite obscure data structures. If we were to, for instance, just get a floppy drive, plug it into a modern machine, copy the files off it, and move the files to secure storage, that would capture a lot of the content. But actually, digital carriers store content in ways that aren't actually visible to the user a lot of the time. So we use digital forensics techniques to make complete authentic copies that would be evidentially robust enough to stand up in court, and that's why we get it from a law enforcement context. So these techniques, they copy the disk bit for bit. So every single piece of data, whether that represents user visible data, whether it represents unallocated space, fragments of metadata that aren't visible to the user, it copies every single bit of that data so that in the future, in 200-300 years time, as I said, when there's digital methodologies for interrogating this data that we can't even imagine, the user at the other end will have access to what is the most authentic copy of the physical medium which we originally brought into the library as a collection item. So we don't want to foreclose research possibilities. We want to preserve the most authentic copy possible. And that's why we use digital forensics techniques to do that.
Going back to how do you get to the material, because you have to talk to a number of different individuals. And I can imagine that this in itself can be quite a challenge. If my little archive at home, so to speak, is anything to go by, it's I sometimes struggle to find content. I'm not quite sure whether I can read it myself. So how do you interact with the people and the individuals?
We interact with them at all stages. In terms of acquisitions, we have a questionnaire, we have forms that they fill out in order to get a sense overall of what their digital lives look like, really, what sort of hardware and software they were using. I will talk to them directly, so I will visit them at their home or at their office, wherever the work was primarily done. We can go through their computers. We have digital forensics equipment to do initial appraisal as well. So if they have, for instance, hard drives sitting in a box somewhere that aren't labeled and they aren't really sure what's on there, as I think we all do, really. I have equipment that I can use with write blockers attached so that it doesn't actually write any information to those disks, but I can plug it into the forensic equipment, do a rapid scan and get a sense of what is on there and what might be archival and what might not be. But we can sit at their computer, we go through their email accounts, what it is that they are comfortable to transfer, what they're not comfortable to transfer, what might potentially be closed for a certain period of time. And all of these conversations, I can record them and take notes. And then when the archive finally comes into the library, I will make the preservation copies using the digital forensics equipment, which takes a lot longer than those rapid scans. So sometimes it can be sort of 12 hours. So obviously it will need to run, and you don't want to be in somebody's office for 12 hours plugging stuff into their computer.
Yes.
So, and once those are made, we will be in contact with the depositor to let them know that the copies have been made, they're safe. Sometimes the depositors will want the original carriers back if it's their computer, and so we will return them to them. And then throughout the cataloging process, we're often in contact as well, because once the cataloger actually has access to the material that we've managed to excavate from the preservation copies, they will have questions about the content, or some of it will potentially be corrupted, and they will need to contact digital preservation in order to get a sense of how that corruption could be solved. But at that point, the cataloger is working with the depositor in a way that is really analogous to how we've worked with depositors of manuscript material for a long, long time, which is that in order to write effective descriptions of this material, a cataloger needs to be in contact with the people who know the material best to a certain extent in order to get key context and stuff.
So it's quite a commitment then for the depositor, as you say, because it's not just I let people in with forensic equipment, which can be quite intimidating, to be honest, because they think there's the SWAT team raiding the house. How do you deal with that? Did you ever encounter people who were wondering, what's he bringing into my house here?
Yeah, absolutely. Attitudes towards depositing any kind of material vary massively between individuals. And because we're not like an institutional archive, when there's no rules about what we need to legally acquire. And so ultimately, we are working in a collaborative relationship with the depositor to explain our methodologies, explain why it's valuable, not just now, but in the long-term future, as we discussed, and also what controls are in place. So we are governed by GDPR. We're not just going to take in this material and immediately release all of it into the reading room for anybody to see. We're always going to be governed by data protection. And so that means that although we might be keeping these preservation copies in perpetuity, we're not just going to provide access to them immediately. This is a very, very long-term project. And we can show them what access looks like now and what processes we go through in order to make sure that that is ethical and legally compliant. And also, ultimately, it's their decision One way in which my role differs from the role of somebody, a SWAT team going into this environment, is that I don't have to take anything. And if they tell me they're not comfortable with any of this, then that's fine. If they tell me they would rather just copy 20 Word documents to a USB stick and make that the deposit, then that is what the archive is. I'm not in the business of taking things from people that they're not interested in depositing with the library. Ultimately, the archive is what the archive is once it reaches the library.
Callum spoke about carriers, data carriers, that get transferred into the library. But what kind of carriers are we talking about? An incredibly popular format was the floppy disk. Perhaps some of your listeners will remember them, I certainly do. When I started to work with computers in the early 1990s, for all purposes, they were the cheapest and most practical solution to store data on. Be that a text file or an application, and of course, operating systems, which you installed on your PC via floppies. So not surprisingly perhaps, floppy disks are what librarians see a lot when they take in material and donations. Leontien Talboom from Cambridge University Library has made floppy disks her mission. I wanted to meet with Leontien so she could take me through what it actually takes to tickle data out of your 30 years old 3.5 inch.
I'm Leontien Talboom, and I'm the technical analyst at Cambridge University Libraries, where I look after the transfer service, which is a service that transfers removable storage media. So that could be anything from hard drives to USB sticks to zip disks, but also floppy disks, which is very exciting. And in the last year, I've been the project lead on the Future Nostalgia project, which is looking at safeguarding knowledge from floppy disks.
What I want to know from you to start with is, why floppy disks? I mean, what's so special about them? Apart from the fact I remember them because I used to work with them. But from your point of view, what's so special about them?
They do have a real nostalgic feeling to them, yes. The thing with floppy disks is that when I started working in my current job, I thought that floppy disks were quite easy in many ways. So we had purchased a 5.25 inch floppy drive with a specific floppy controller that could then read those disks, and a USB 3.5 inch floppy drive reader. And I thought, yes, we've got it sorted. It's going to be fine. And the more and more I worked with our collection material at the library, the more and more I started to realize that floppy disks are quite unique. They come from different systems. They have different sizes. They have different readers that they need. And that just basically led to my interest in floppy disks. Yeah.
Talking about sizes and different formats, I mean, what formats do you know? We know the three, I think it's a 3.5 or 3.25. I can't remember now. I know it's 5.25, the large floppy disk.
Yeah.
I think in the 90s it was the 3.5 inch.
Yes. So the 3.5 inch is the one that people will be most familiar with. So they are the floppies that are actually not very floppy. They've got a hard case around them. And they are the most common floppy disks. So as you already said, like they were very, very popular in the 90s. They peaked in the mid-90s, but yeah, they were around for a considerable amount of time. But before that, you also had the 5.25, so the larger ones, which were floppy, which is fun.
You could bend them, yeah.
You could bend them, and they were used on personal computers, but also on research systems and business systems and early word processors. And then even going back further, the first floppy disk is the 8-inch floppy disk. So they're even bigger. They're not very common in collections. There's a few that may have been used on early word processors, but they were mainly used for backups and servers. So you don't really see them in collection material, but they are certainly around. One that is quite unique to the UK, and I should say Europe as well, is the 3-inch floppy disk.
Oh.
It's mainly associated with the Amstrad machine, but was also popular in Germany and a few other places in Europe. They are not as common, but they are also very cute.
Are they floppy or are they hard like the 3.5?
They're also hard. And then there's also a bunch of floppy disks that are slightly different sizes and from slightly different systems that are around, but they're really not common. a fun place to look them up is the Museum of Obsolete Media that has a whole list of floppy disks. But yeah, it's the 8-inch, 5.25, 3.5, and 3-inch that are the most common floppies.
And for you, for looking at data, what's the common type then? Is it a 3.5, or do you still get a lot of a 5.25?
3.5, by far, 3.5. So we do have 5.25-inch floppy disks in our collection. And again, it very much depends on what your collection or memory institution is collecting to determine what type of floppy disk you get in. But we have a lot of 3.5-inch floppies and quite a substantial amount of 5.25-inch floppies that come from early business systems or from early computers, so personal computers. So yeah, but 3.5, yes, by far the most common one.
Well, I do remember 3.5. Maybe some people my age will remember installations of Linux or Windows on the PC, which comes in a series of 10 or 11 floppy disks, and it was always the last one which was broken and corrupt that would bomb the entire installations. Ah, the fond memories of the past, eh? But never mind. So what kind of data do you actually get on these floppy disks?
So it really ranges from collection to collection. So when I started this work, I was mainly expecting to see people's personal papers or early drafts from books, but we have had a wide range of a whole bunch of different stuff. So most of it will be related to personal collections within the library, so people's personal papers. And so what I was saying about drafts, sometimes it's pictures, sometimes it's other stuff related to them. But we also have a number of business collections or business archives in our collections. And that means that we get more of spreadsheets, people's emails, that type of stuff. One of my favorite collections has a bunch of early internet forums that have been saved onto the floppy disks.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
really fun. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
they're
user
really fun.
groups and things like that.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that's really exciting, but also stuff that is more bespoke. So Cambridge, of course, being a research university, there's quite a lot of research data out there. So a lot of departments that will have that will have used floppy disks in the past on more of these like research systems. So we've got like data from I should say this right, but from the stars, basically.
Data from the stars.
Data from the stars, but like cosmic data. So like it's like certain points that have been recorded and they've just been, because the systems at the time worked with floppy disks, that's what they're stored on. We've got some pieces of bespoke software that people have written that are related to certain research projects. So anything that you can dream of is probably on a floppy disk.
That's amazing. And we think of we think of data being stored somewhere, whether it's a floppy disk or a hard drive, or nowadays like an SSD, a solid state device, as in form of a file. But is that the only way in which data gets stored on floppy disks, particularly on older systems, I guess? You may not actually get data in file format, do you?
Yes. So it ranges so much on these old systems. When talking about the more common floppy disks, so the 3.5-inch floppy disk, most of them will have been formatted for either a Macintosh computer or some type of Mac computer or an IBM PC or something equivalent to this. So something MS-DOS formatted. For the 3.5-inch, that's the most common one. But when you go more back into time, so if you start looking at the 5.25, it becomes more of a Wild West. So at that time, it is really fun, but also can be very challenging. At the time, no specific company had the market share in Europe, which means that there were so many different systems. And every single system has a slightly different way of formatting their machine, which can make it really, really challenging to get any meaningful data from these floppy disks. On top of that, there's like layers of complexity. So like first off, it's like it can be challenging to get the specific hardware to get it to actually make an image. So a 3-inch is a good example of that. A 3-inch drive is quite difficult to get. But then secondly, like the formatting is really challenging. And then thirdly, what you're mentioning as well, like there could be a whole wide range of stuff on the floppy disk. So only knowing how it's been formatted does not necessarily mean that you can actually access or take anything from it. Sometimes you have to install old software. Sometimes you have to like carve the files out of a hex editor. Like there's a whole wide range of different ways of getting data from a floppy disk.
So the way that floppy disks are being read, maybe you can take us through that, what's actually involved on the hardware side and then on the software side, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Because the size changed from 8-inch to 5.25 to 3.5, and then sort of the odd 3-inch disk. But is the way they're being read fundamentally different? Has that changed? Or what's the process of reading them and writing them?
No, the process of reading them and writing them has actually kind of stayed very similar. So floppy disks are in some ways very similar to audio cassettes. So they've got a layer of iron oxide on them that is magnetic, and that's where the data gets written to. So again, very similar to audio cassettes in that sense. In terms of like the different drives, they all just work the same. So they write data from like the outside all the way to the inside. That's the same for all the floppy disks. But over the years, they made advancements. So they made some advancements in the material that the floppy disks were made on, so they could get more data on it. They made advancements in the drives that they could use. So the drives became more precise, and that's why they became smaller, so you could get more data on them. And they also made advancements in the encoding that's on the floppy disk. So there's like 3 ways that they basically were able to get more and more data on a really small surface. But it is the case that like if you've got an 8-inch floppy disk, you do need an 8-inch drive to read it. So yeah, they are very specific to their drives. In terms of hardware and reading floppy disks, modern computers can't talk to floppy disk drives anymore, which is a bit sad.
Yes. Haven't seen, but the younger generation probably doesn't know what the hell we're talking about.
No, I teach a lot of students, and some of them know what floppy disks are and some of them don't. But if you want to feel old, teach some students about floppy disks. Yeah, but they are always very fascinated by it, which is very fun. Yeah, so modern computers can't talk to a floppy disk. So even if you were to acquire a floppy disk drive, it's not as easy as just like connecting it up to your computer and it will be recognized. So the way that how you make your modern computer talk to a floppy disk drive is through something called a floppy controller. And there's quite a lot of these in the community, and the retro computing community develops quite a few of these as well. So you've got ones like the CryoFlux, the FC5025, the Cat Weasel. There's a whole bunch of these out there. I know the names are great.
Cat Weasel, yeah.
Cat
indeed.
Weasel. The one that we use is called a Grease Weasel. I know, even better.
Okay.
It's purple and it's got a weasel on it. I love it.
The Grease Weasel. Okay.
The Grease Weasel. And what these little floppy controllers make possible is that you can actually make images of floppy disks on modern computers. There's basically 2 ways of doing it. So if you don't know how your floppy disk has been formatted, you can do something called a flux stream. And this is where it just makes the most raw copy of the floppy disk, basically. So it just picks up the magnetic flux that is available and it stores that. If you know what system it's come from, so how it's been formatted, these floppy controllers also make it possible for you to make a logical file image of these floppy disks. And they're the stuff that you would put into emulators, for example, or they're the ones that you can use in certain tools to extract files from. So yeah, there's like 2 different ways that you can basically do it.
Well, that's very thrilling. And of course, you need to have access to the machines, because I guess that if modern you certainly can't buy them on the market as new devices because they're no longer manufactured. So you have to probably go into computer museums or some other places and find them.
eBay.
Or I went to the Center for Computing History recently, and there were a number of old devices, and they have, I think, the Grease Weasel as well.
Yes, they do have a Grease Weasel. So I volunteer over at the Center for Computing History. So we have loads of chats about floppy disks, which is very exciting. But they certainly have quite unique floppy disk drives and quite unique stuff in their collection that can be very, very helpful. Most of the drives that we have at the library have been donated to me. So people now know that I like floppy disks. So people have given me quite a lot of stuff, which is really exciting. The other thing that we do is if I do need a piece of equipment and I can't acquire it from, for example, people at the Center for Computing History, or I can't acquire it through asking people, we will buy it from places like eBay. This was a little bit of a challenge to get the library to agree that was a good idea.
eBay? Okay.
Yeah, it's like, okay. But they are now fully aware of that's one of the main ways to get it.
Yeah, I think the byte stream, when you get the raw data off the disk, that's probably a challenge because then you have to think about, well, how do I decode that if I don't really know what the system is? I guess there are some tools available for that as well. But for the stuff where you could reasonably assume that, let's say it's an OS2 disk or a Windows or a Linux, or, well, Linux didn't exist at the time in the 80s. But there are also file formats that have gone out of scope and they have become obsolete. So you need that as well, don't you?
Yep. So it's a whole layer of many challenges. So only getting your floppy disk into the right logical image, for example, Macintosh or whatever's out there, doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually read or access your files. Like you say, sometimes it's a case of like chasing down the software that it's been written on, which can be, again, a very challenging task. And even then, like what we also sometimes struggle with is that I will be able to open and access a file by installing certain software into an emulator and opening our disk image in that emulator. But then actually getting it out of the emulator into a modern format is another challenge. So yeah, there's so many fun things about floppy disks.
As Leontien mentioned, it's at times tricky to get to the equipment that allows you to read old floppy disks. Well, Leontien, as she also mentioned, is a volunteer at the Centre of Computing History, also in Cambridge. A computer museum sounds exactly the right place to look for old equipment and software, of course. But having the equipment, having hard drives and floppy disks is one thing. Getting it all to work and being able to get to the data stored on them, quite another. Perhaps some of you have heard of what is known as bit rot. And I thought that the Centre of Computing History might know a thing or two about it. And so, on a rainy day in January 2026, I made my way to Cambridge to meet with Adrian Page Mitchell, my last guest for this episode. The computer museum was quite busy when I arrived. Apparently a class was visiting with the students playing with some of the equipment. Adrian took me to the floor upstairs, which turned out to be like an Aladdin's cave for all things computing. From old gaming consoles, operating systems on disks, to old computer models. Rack upon rack, there was something interesting to find. Lots of it forgotten by now, of course, be that an old computer model or an operating system that's been made obsolete. Like, for instance, OS2 from IBM. Does anyone remember that? I wanted to find out from Adrian how bits actually die, and how reliable, or not, storage media actually are. From what Leontien said, floppy disks can get moldy, or the plastic can break, not to mention the magnetic signals that will fade over time. But what about the other media, like the ones that came after floppy disks? Optical disks, for instance, like your CDs and DVDs. For Adrian, keeping the old tools alive and working is a real challenge. After all, the museum doesn't simply want to keep stuff for people to look at. They want visitors to play with and experience old computer consoles and old devices. So here's Adrian.
Okay, so I am Adrian. I am the collections officer here at the Centre for Computing History. Basically, that means I decide what comes into the collection. Is it important enough to come in? And then we've got a collections manager, Harriet, who is the person who decides how we look after it.
Right.
I've been here now since the beginning, so I used to volunteer, and then they basically said to me one day, why don't you come and work here? You spend enough time here as it is.
You may as well get paid for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I came here as a volunteer in 2013. And yes, I've been working with the collection since the beginning, but as a paid member of staff since 2018.
Since when does the museum exist?
The museum's existed since 2006, and it was really founded in 2008. That's when the charity was completely formed. But it used to be in Haverhill. And it used to be only by appointment because it was in like 3 great big warehouses. So you could go in the little foyer of the office that was there. And they would bring anything out you wanted to see. And then a board of trustees was formed and it arrived here in 2013.
Oh, wow. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Absolutely. And we've just been growing and growing. And the collection's been growing. It's now over 44,000 items.
Oh my God, yeah.
In the collection.
And we're sitting here at what looks like a library where there's some items here.
Yes, so we've got a lot of our games are out on the shelf here. We've also got how many is it now? 353 software boxes.
Okay.
So they're all the games, and it's not just games, it's operating systems, it's art programs, all kinds of other software as well. It's not just a games emporium by any means. And basically, we know at some point they need to be stored better than they are. So we've got our really nice, precious ones out here that sat behind you there in their nice boxes.
Yeah.
But basically, all of them should be cared for individually, not just in boxes.
Because they decay, and that's what we're going to talk about, because I'm looking at a optical disc from the BBC, from the Doomsday Project.
From the Doomsday Project, yes.
So why don't you tell me something about that?
So the Doomsday Project itself was a BBC initiative. They wanted to get a snapshot of life in like 1985. So they got data from 1 million kids and women's institutes from all over the country. They filled in little forms of what was going on in their town and village, what church they had, for instance, and how many people attend the church, what shops are in the town, what other facilities there are. Then there was quite a lot of social history on it. So kids were asked, tell us about your school day. What do you do on your school day? And this all got recorded, went off to the BBC, it was edited, and then appeared on a series of laser discs.
One of which we have here.
So they're a great big 12-inch disc. They look like a giant CD for anyone who's never seen one. A giant CD or DVD, but they're quite a different format.
They're almost like a long record.
They are. And Laserdisc was the only thing that could do a quick indexing, find an answer. If someone put something in the search, the computer could then go off and talk to the Laserdisc player and go, right, well, here's a little bit of information.
But it looks like it's seen better days because we can see some decoloring. So how are these discs actually made?
So these discs are made, so we've got a metal layer in there, which holds the data, and then there are 2 plastic protective layers, and then they're sealed on the edge. And what can happen is it can either be a manufacturing fault where the glue isn't quite right, and the glue starts separating from the layers, and then that could let oxygen in, and then basically the metal layer rusts.
Right,
and the data starts getting lost. And we're looking at this one here, and you can actually see through the disc if you hold it up to the light.
Yes.
You should not be able to see light coming through your disc. And then that's it, the data is destroyed.
Can you actually save any data from this? Because this looks quite damaged. And we see not just that no light gets through, but we also see some decoloring of the corner, which looks like rust a lot of it, doesn't it?
A data disk like this, it depends. So the index will be in the middle, and then it will play out. But it depends if it needs something from the edge of the disk. It will come up with an error that it can't find that disk. And we've got some that just don't play at all. The index has gone.
And then it's gone, the data
and then,
lost.
Or as good as, because the player can't index the data. We actually have reverse engineered the entire Doomsday system here. You can go on to our website and you can explore most of it. But unfortunately, a lot of it is copyrighted until about 2030, 2050, something like that. So we can't have the Royal Wedding video that's on there. Well, you can't have the music because the music's
copyrighted.
So the whole thing isn't there. It's a bit incomplete. But what we have got is all the data is safe for now. Because, it's going on to big solid state modern drives.
Yes.
But eventually they're going to fail. They're going to degrade and they're magnetic. They're going to fade. And before that happens, so what we do is we swap the drives. I think it's every 5 years. We swap them onto a new drive.
So going back to that disc, I mean, this is quite a big disc and they don't do them anymore. So we have CDs, which are considerably smaller.
Stopped Laserdiscs in 2001.
Yeah, indeed. And now we have Blu-ray for video and we have CDs. But the manufacturing process is still a little bit similar, isn't it?
It's a little bit similar. So instead of using a plastic or a lacquer to seal the discs, Blu-rays are a little bit more expensive. I think they use a silver compound.
Right.
But it was announced, was it last month, that Warner Brothers, most Blu-rays produced between, or any of their media, DVDs, Blu-rays, and at the time HD DVD that was still around, there was a fault in their manufacture for Warner Brothers films, and they've all started to fail. So my collection at home, for instance, I've got a large collection of HD DVDs. I'm a big film buff. I didn't know what was going to win, Blu-ray or HD DVD.
Yeah.
So I collected both. I have got 38 Warner Brothers HD DVDs, and only 2 of them still play. The others, they crash the player.
Check my collection, because I am actually a little bit of a film buff myself, and I've got a few Blu-ray discs, high definition. But what I find surprising is that I always think that, okay, magnetic tapes, they're demagnetized, there's the mechanical stress. If I think of the audio tapes, when you play them back a number of times, they just go weird, just go wobbly. But with optical disc, you think this holds for eternity. But
well, that's the thing. We thought they were the future. We thought they were going to be around forever. But anyone who's out there now who's put all their photographs and their old videos onto CDRs from their computer or DVDRs, you might want to think about moving them again.
After a certain while. So how long do you think they last?
If they're cheap, they're lasting only a few years.
Right.
They used a very, very thin protective coating on them, cost-cutting or whatever, to mass produce a rewritable CD or a writable one. The process was cheap.
And so, therefore the product is cheap, and therefore the product...
Exactly. Unless you wanted each disc to cost like £5.80 or something, I think I was told, instead of literally a few pence each. Unfortunately, they did cut corners. They did very, very thin layer of lacquer on. And of course, when that starts disappearing, the disc very quickly becomes unreadable.
Yeah.
And you get these horror, like you say on here, even on CDs, you'll see a brown mark on some of them. Right. And also you can tell with some as well, because you get this weird warping of these spectrum colours as well. Should be a nice straight line on the disc, and it isn't. It's got this weird pattern. Where it's not getting the pattern through on this particular damaged side.
So apart from optical discs, we have different storage media. So for instance, solid state drives. And are they any safer, or what's the danger there?
No safer at all. We have got no data of how long they'll last, but eventually, again, you're going to face a very similar problem. We're not taking that chance, so we are retiring drives after 5 years that are solid state, because we just don't know. And then they're backed up in 3 places as well, so someone takes our entire collection home at the end of the day, so they've got a copy at home in case something happens to the museum. And then there's a solid state drive here. If something happens to that, if something happens to the building, touch wood, then we've also got an off-site server as well. That is, backed up 3 times.
It can't be safe enough. But
no, exactly.
Yeah, but solid state and optical discs are fairly modern. So in olden days, we had magnetic discs, we had hard drives, we had magnetic tapes.
So they're all magnetic.
They're all magnetic, and therefore magnetism decays after a while.
It does. It fades. And also there are other problems as well. So 3.5-inch floppy disks is the one we're having particular problems with. So original Amiga ST PC discs, we've had them where we've gone to put them in the machine, the heads come up and just the plastic of the disc has disintegrated.
And it comes off.
Yeah, so it just cracks and breaks because plastic off-gases. So if it hasn't been stored particularly well, especially if it's been in a hot attic or something, it'll off-gas faster. And it gets to a point where it becomes really brittle. So if you've ever had an old favourite plastic toy or whatever, and suddenly the arms start breaking off, or you start seeing white patches on them, that is the off-gassing and the plastic becoming incredibly brittle.
Yeah, but before we had 3.5-inch, we had something like 5-inch, didn't we?
5 1/4.
Are they more stable than 5 1/4?
5 1/4-inch discs, so they are the proper floppy discs, they're in a floppy case. We often find they're completely readable.
Which is strange, because I thought they're older than the 3.5.
Yeah, it's what they're kept in. So, the 3.5-inch discs in this solid plastic case. If it's been kept in a game box with the instruction manual and all the other cardboard things, you've got all these different chemical particles floating about. Right. They start sticking to the disc or sticking to the media. Another really thing, if someone's been storing something in their garage or up in their attic and the atmosphere's a bit damp, or whatever, then the big threat to those discs, all of them, the 5 1/4, 3-inch and 3.5, is mould. So you'll get mould on the surface. So one of our volunteers, John, is an absolute whiz at preserving data and getting data off the most damaged discs. And he's invented this little chamber, sits on the table.
What is that? Okay.
And you put the disc in, and then he releases a chemical in there and it kills the mould.
Without damaging
the disc. So there's nothing sticky on it, it's just vapour. And so he's invented that, and he'll go in and he'll turn the disc slightly so it exposes the to where the head normally reads it, back in there again. And he's had some great success. Because the last thing you want to do, if you've got an old drive and you're trying to put it in our machine, like we've got here, our copying machine, our grease weasel, which a lot of people will know what that is. Basically, you don't want the head to come up, this to spin and take all the mould and grime onto the head, because then you're opening the drive up, cleaning the head.
And that's a hassle.
And it's a hassle, absolutely.
And damaging the head perhaps as well.
Well, it could do, absolutely. Damage the head, or also if it's taking the mould off aggressively that's really stuck on there, then you're endangering the data again. There's a lot to this preservation, keep the machine that you're copying from and to nice and healthy, and then trying to make sure that the disk is as healthy as it can be before you even attempt to write it or read it.
What about magnetic tapes? Are you dealing with magnetic tapes? I'm asking because during my uni days, we had a lot of physical data on magnetic tapes, because they were the biggest storage medium at the time. What about the degradation there? They're magnetic. So
they're magnetic again. We're finding cassettes, for whatever reason, whether it's because it's tightly wound onto each other, we're not sure. We're finding them pretty reliable. So if someone comes here and says, I used to play this old game, last week it was Commando on the ZX Spectrum, can I have a go? But can I watch it off the original tape? Because I want to show my child how we load off this tape. So we went, got it out of the collection, got a tape player, put the tape in, loaded first time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What we will always do, though, we'll always check that the tape hasn't gone stiff. Because like you said earlier, it's a mechanical thing. It's got little spinning wheels in it, which can jam. If they jam, the tape won't, or it will keep turning off one side, won't turn on the other, and then it won't reel properly, and then it chucks it out into the mechanism, which we've all had in our time, I'm quite sure.
Oh, yes, we did. With audio tapes.
Yeah, so we have to give an inspection of the cassette. Once we've loaded something once, then record it on a system that it did load on a particular date, so that people know it's a healthy copy or not.
Okay, so if you have a DVD or CD collection, make sure you don't keep them in a hot place with lots of sunlight. And if you use an SSD or a writable DVD as a backup medium, try and make sure you can read your stuff every now and then. And it might be a good idea to replace the device after a few years. Adrian and his colleagues, as you've heard, are doing that every 5 years. Next week, Tuesday, we're going to return to the subject of agile software development with my guest Dave Thomas. Dave is the author of The Pragmatic Programmer, but some of you may also know him as one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto from 2001. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have been able to talk about him about it and what has become of agile software practices since the manifesto was published. But before I end, there are a couple of announcements I have to make. For one, we're going into a busy conference season yet again. So here it is. The 31st of August will see the annual Research Software Engineering Day in Switzerland. If you plan to make a contribution, you'll still have time to do so. The deadline is the 21st of June. Registrations are also open for the annual Conference of Research Software Engineering in the UK. It'll be between the 9th and the 11th of September in Sheffield this time, and this is not just any conference, it's actually the 10th anniversary since the first RSE conference in the UK in 2016. And just 2 days before that, also in Sheffield, you'll get the International Research Conference organised by RISA between the 7th and the 8th of September. And if you happen to be on the other side of the pond, the Atlantic one for me, in October you can make your way to San Jose between the 19th and the 21st of October for the 4th installment of the US Conference of Research Software Engineering. And not falling behind, the German RSE Association will run a collaborations workshop between the 23rd and the 25th of September in the northern city of Göttingen. Well, this is not an exhaustive list, and there are plenty of other workshops and conferences, like the Nordic RSE Conference, which is in the Norwegian city of Tromsø, and actually starts on the same day this episode is published, the 9th of June. With so much stuff going on, it's really getting a little bit tricky to keep up with it all. But anyway, I'm also very excited about another announcement I'd like to make, because on the 11th of June, a Thursday, you get to hear a very special Code for Thought episode. An episode in Spanish. Sofia Minano and Carlos Calderon will talk about all things RSE. In Spanish, of course. Hola. Well, if there will be more episodes in Spanish, I do not know at the moment, but I'm very grateful to Carlos and Sofia to give me their time. So if you're a Spanish speaker, or you want to reboot your Spanish language skills, why not tune in then? Many thanks for listening. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.